Yes, I'm ready. Let's go through your questions one by one. What would you like to start with? So the question is historically, some words in English ending in S in singular were reanalyzed by the speakers of modern English as plurals and new singulars were formed. This process of change is called conversion, back formation, extension, amelioration. So the answer should be back formation. Now, moving on to the next question, which has two assertions. The first is that language shift can only occur as a gradual process. Second, that language shift can be explicitly planned. Now, I want you to elaborate what this really is. And language shift can occur as a gradual process. That is very true. The second assertion that language shift can be explicitly planned. Both of these are true. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So, compound verbs, which are commonly found in Indian languages today, are due to the influence of the Dravidian language family. Now, I want you to throw some insights, deeper insights into what this really tries to signify or mean, because it is talking about compound words and them coming from the, the Dravidian language family. So, okay, we are done with this question, Dravidian language family. Now, the next is um, in syntactic change, the following is a major mechanism. So, what is a major mechanism in syntactic change? Analogy, metaphor, grammaticalization, borrowing. Analogy is when sound becomes even, it doesn't, it becomes regular. So that's analogy. Now the metaphor is actually metaphor, as I believe, is the use of some other expression to mean something else. For example, the idioms that we normally use in languages. The next is grammaticalization and lexicalization. So grammaticalizing something like villain, the word villain became will, right? Villain, which originally meant to want, that became will. It lexicalized to the represent the grammaticalized future tense. Now this is grammaticalization. It's syntactic change. The following is a major mechanism. That's grammaticalization. The next is ergativity. So ergativity is basically an important feature of some South Asian languages. True. The second assertion is that some South Asian languages are classified as split ergative languages. That is very true. Split ergative languages like Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Nepali. So these are split ergative languages. Now, can you explain what split ergativity really means?
It seems like there's a mix-up in your statement. Split ergative languages are different from split allogative languages. Split ergativity refers to languages that use both ergod and accusative alignments, depending on factors such as tense, aspect, or the person of the subject. For example, languages like Hindi, Urdu, and Nepali exhibit split ergativity. In these languages, the ergative construction is typically used in the past tense, while the nominative accusative construction is used in the present tense. On the other hand, split allogative languages are a different concept. They involve split systems that may vary based on grammatical, like mood or clause type, and this term is not as commonly discussed as split ergativity. Given that, the assertion you mentioned about South Asian languages being classified as split
Why is the connection breaking off? I don't get it. What's the deal? What's the deal with it? Audio issues. Audio issues. I It interrupted. Misheard. Not misheard. Okay, so that's the split ergative language. The split ergativity is conditioned by, so it is conditioned by something that we just talked about. So both of these are true. Moving on to the next question, the great vowel shift. Where vowels became probably longer in English. So tell me about great vowel shift and what is this is a result of. So this is a result of drag chain. So explain to me what is great vowel shift and what is drag chain, and how is drag chain associated with the great vowel shift.
It sounds like you're referring to the Great Vowel Shift in English, which is a significant historical event in the phonological evolution. The Great Vowel Shift was a series of changes in the pronunciation of English vowels that took place between the late Middle Ages and the early modern English period, roughly from the 15th to the 17th centuries. During this shift, long vowels in English gradually changed their pronunciation. For example, the Middle English word bite was pronounced as beat. But after the shift, it came to be pronounced closer to how we say it today, bite. Essentially, vowels that were once pronounced higher in the mouth became diphthongs, and vowels pronounced lower in the mouth moved up. Now, about drag chain. This term refers to a type of sound change in historical linguistics, where one sound change causes a drag effect, pulling other sounds into new positions. In the case of the Great Vowel Shift, when one vowel moved to a new position, it created a gap that dragged the adjacent vowel into the space left behind. This process continued in a kind of chain reaction, which is why it's called a drag chain. So to summarize, the Great Vowel Shift involved a drag chain of vowel changes, where one vowel's movement triggered shifts in other vowels. This reshaping of vowel sounds profoundly affected the phonology of English, and is a key reason why English spelling can be so challenging today, because it still reflects the pre-shift pronunciation. Does that help clarify things?
Yes, moving on to the next question. So, techniques that learners employ when attempting to use target language for the purpose of communication they are called competence strategies, rehearsal strategies, communicative strategies, right? So, explain to me what this really means and what really communicative strategy is.
The correct answer to the question about techniques learners use for communication in a target language is communicative strategies. Communicative strategies are techniques or methods that language learners use to overcome difficulties and gaps in their knowledge when trying to communicate effectively in the target language. These strategies are particularly important when learners don't have full command of the language, but still need to convey meaning or maintain a conversation. Some examples of communicative strategies include paraphrasing. If a learner doesn't know a specific word, they might describe it using other words. Using body language to help convey meaning when the words aren't available. Code switching. switching to their native language for a word or phrase they don't know in the target language, asking for clarification, directly asking the conversation partner to explain or repeat something. Simplification, using simpler words or grammar structures when they aren't confident about more complex expressions. These strategies are essential because they help learners keep the conversation going, even when their language skills are still developing. They reflect an active approach to language learning, where learners are not just passively absorbing the language, but are also actively trying to use it, despite the limitations they might face. Would you like to go into more detail about any specific communicative strategy?
Move on to the next question, though. It has two assertions. Language awareness is used in the area of educational linguistics. The second, language awareness does not include metalinguistic awareness. Now, the first assertion is correct, but please elaborate a little more. The second assertion is not correct. Also, about the second assertion, explain why this assertion is not correct. What the heck is wrong with this motherfucker? All right, so the next is it has two assertions. The first, language awareness is used in the area of educational linguistics. The second, language awareness does not include meta-linguistic awareness. The second statement is incorrect. The first is correct, that language awareness is used in the area of educational linguistics. So elaborate briefly, very briefly, on what this statement really means.
You're right. The first statement is correct, and the second one is incorrect. Language awareness in the context of educational linguistics refers to an understanding of how language works, both in terms of its structure and its social functions. It involves being conscious of the nuances of language, including grammar, vocabulary, and the ways language can vary depending on context. Metalinguistic awareness is actually a key part of language awareness. It's the ability to think about and reflect on the language itself, rather than just using it. For example, when learners recognize that a word can have multiple meanings depending on its context, they are demonstrating metalinguistic awareness. In summary, language awareness, which is crucial in educational settings, includes metalinguistic awareness. This combination helps learners understand not just what to say, but how and why certain language forms are used in different contexts.
All right. One is true, but two is false. Moving on to the next question: a language teaching approach which focuses on language functions and communicative competence is a communicative functional approach. So, explain this to me, and explain in a way that it stays with me forever. Exemplify what this really is, because I have trouble, remembering, recollecting everything, and recollecting what this means and how this applies to the real world. So it talks about the language functions and the communicative competence. So communicative competence includes the linguistic knowledge as well as the social knowledge, right? So the communicative functional approach dictates the language functions as well as the communicative competence. Elaborate a little more on who worked on it, and in which work did he publish this, what year did he publish, what year did he propose this approach in. Elaborate. Takes a lot of
The
time.
communicative functional approach is a language teaching method that emphasizes the importance of teaching language as a tool for communication. This approach goes beyond just teaching grammar and vocabulary. It focuses on how language is used in real-life situations, which is referred to as language functions, like requesting, apologizing, or giving directions, and developing communicative competence. Breaking it down, Language functions. These are the specific purposes that language serves in communication. For example, if you're at a restaurant, the language function could be ordering food. If you're at a meeting, it might be giving a presentation. The communicative functional approach teaches these functions directly, so learners understand not just what to say, but why they are saying it. Communicative competence. This concept includes both linguistic knowledge, understanding grammar, vocabulary, etc., and social knowledge, knowing how to use language appropriately in different social contexts. For example, saying, "Could you pass the salt?" at a dinner table is more socially appropriate than just saying salt, even though both would get the point across. An example to help you remember. Imagine you're learning English and you're taught how to order food at a restaurant. The teacher doesn't just give you a list of food-related vocabulary. Instead, you practice a conversation where you walk into a restaurant, greet the waiter, look at the menu, place your order, and thank the waiter. This practice simulates a real-life situation and helps you understand the social cues and phrases commonly used in that context. Historical context. The communicative functional approach grew out of the communicative language teaching, CLT, movement in the late 20th century. One of the key figures in the development of this approach was Del Hymes. Hymes introduced the idea of communicative competence in the early 1970s as a response to the limitations of purely grammar-focused teaching methods. Emig Halliday, a linguist, also significantly contributed to this approach with his work on systemic functional linguistics, SFL, which emphasized the role of language functions in communication. His work, particularly the 1978 book Language as Social Semiotic, laid the foundation for understanding how language serves different functions in society. Remembering it, think of the communicative functional approach as a way of teaching language that prepares you for real-life conversations, not just textbook exercises. It's like training for a sport by actually playing the game rather than just lifting weights. By focusing on both what to say, language functions, and how to say it in different situations, communicative competence, this approach ensures you're ready to use language effectively in the real world. I hope this explanation helps it stick with you.
I hope the same. Now let's move on to the next one. So information processing model was proposed by, so IP model, information processing model was proposed by McLaughlin. So McLaughlin proposed the information processing model. Now I want you to explain what this model is, what it talks about, where does it apply, examples of its application, in which work did he propose this model, what year did he propose this model into, other implications of it, if it has any. So talk about that, talk about all of those.
I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble responding right now. Please wait a bit and try again.
So the next question is information processing model was proposed by McLaughlin. Now I want you to elaborate what this model is and when did he propose it, and in which year did he propose this model, what it is, what are its applications, and so yeah, talk about all of those topics that I just mentioned.
The information processing model is a cognitive framework that describes how humans process, store, and retrieve information. It was proposed by Barry McLaughlin in the context of second language acquisition, and he developed this model further during the 1980s. What is the information processing model? At its core, the information processing model likens the human mind to a computer. Just like a computer processes data, the human mind processes information through a series of stages. 1. Input. Information from the environment, like words in a new language, is taken in through the senses. 2. Processing. The brain processes this information, organizing and interpreting it. This includes working memory, where information is temporarily held while it's being processed. 3. Storage. Important information is stored in long-term memory, where it can be retained over time. 4. Retrieval. When needed, stored information is retrieved from memory and used to perform tasks, answer questions, or engage in conversations. Applications of the information processing model. Language learning. McLaughlin applied this model to explain how learners acquire a second language. According to this model, language learning involves processing new linguistic information through practice and repetition until it becomes automatic and stored in long-term memory. Education. Teachers can use the information processing model to design lessons that help students better encode information into long-term memory. For example, breaking down information into smaller chunks, called chunking, providing repetition, and allowing students to rehearse what they've learned can all enhance learning. Cognitive psychology. The model is widely used in cognitive psychology to understand how people think, learn, and remember. It explains why some tasks become easier over time as they become automated through practice. When and where did McLaughlin propose this model? Barry McLaughlin first outlined his ideas in the early 1980s, with one of his key works being Theories of Second Language Learning, published in 1987. In this book, he detailed the information processing model as it applies to second language acquisition, emphasizing that language learning is a gradual process where skills develop over time as learners process more language input and practice more. Action. How to remember this. Think of the information processing model as your brain's way of being a super organized library. When you learn something new, it's like acquiring a new book. First, you read input, then you understand and organize the information in your mind, processing. You put it on a shelf for future use, storage, and when you need it again, you know exactly where to find it, retrieval. Over time, with enough practice, retrieving that book becomes second nature, like grabbing your favorite novel without even thinking. Does this explanation help?
Yes, it certainly did. Now, the next question is language units which are subject to social or stylistic variation are called sociolinguistic variables. So, I want you to explain what this statement really means.
The statement, language units which are subject to social or stylistic variation are called sociolinguistic variables, refers to certain aspects of language that change depending on social factors or the context in which the language is used. Breaking it down, language units, these are elements of language like words, phrases, or sounds. Social or stylistic variation. This means that these elements can change based on who is speaking, who they are speaking to, or the situation they are in. For example, a person might speak differently to their boss than to their friends, or use different words when writing a formal letter compared to texting. Variables. These are the specific aspects of language that vary in this way. A classic example is how people pronounce the R sound in words. In some English-speaking communities, like in parts of New York, people might drop the R at the end of words. Car becomes ka. This variation depends on social factors like age, class, or even ethnicity. An example to help remember. Imagine you're at a formal event and you say, "Good evening." The way you pronounce each word and the vocabulary you choose is influenced by the social setting. You want to sound polite and respectful. Now, imagine you're with close friends later that night. You might say, "Hey, what's up?" The way you speak here is more relaxed and informal. The difference in how you speak in these two situations illustrates sociolinguistic variables in action. Why it matters. Understanding sociolinguistic variables helps us see that language is not just a fixed system. It's flexible and shaped by social contexts. This concept is crucial in sociolinguistics because it reveals how language reflects social identities and relationships. So, whenever you notice that people speak differently in different situations or communities, you're observing sociolinguistic variables at work.
All right, moving on to the next question. The first assertion is elaborated code. Elaborated code is said to be used in relatively formal, educated situations. Second assertion, elaborated code is salient for its meaningfulness or extra linguistic context, such as gestures and shared beliefs. The second assertion is not correct because elaborated code does not talk about shared or extra linguistic information such as gestures and shared beliefs. So one is true, but two is false. Let's move on to the next question. The concept of communicative competence in social linguistics is attributed to Delheims. And now moving on to the next one, the process of.
Yes, that's correct. The concept of communicative competence in sociolinguistics is attributed to Delheims. What is communicative competence?
Now, let's talk about the next question, which is the process of standardization of language does not involve one of the following. So, standardization of language, elaboration of function. The options are elaboration of function, word order, making the language prestigious, and codification of the form. So, one of the processes here does not belong to the standardization of language. What is it? I think word order. Yes, word order is not one of the parameters for language standardization. Apart from that, elaboration of function, making the language prestigious, the codification of the forms are all they belong to the standardization of the language. Now, I want this motherfucker to elaborate what these really mean. So elaboration of function. This is what is getting me. Um, Now getting to me now, making the language prestigious, so you can understand what this means, right? So standard by standardizing the language, we are attempting to make the language prestigious. And then prestigious in the sense that people accept it with good faith, right? Because it's prestigious, so people would tend to use it. Now, moving on to the next, next question. So the process of standardization of language, it really talks about the language that is, standardizing the language. So the three, that is elaboration of function, making the language prestigious, and the codification of the form, are all they belong to the process of standardization of language. So making the language prestigious is understandable. The codification of the form, so what format of the language will be used by the people and the society is decided. So is codified. So language is codified, given a proper script that is to be implemented. So that's understandable. Now, elaboration of function. So can you speak on the elaboration of function briefly? Not by not don't use too elaborate an explanation. I don't have much time, but talk about elaboration function in relation to the standardization of language.
Certainly. Elaboration of function in the context of language standardization means expanding the language's use across various domains. This includes formalizing its use in education, government, and media. Essentially, it involves adapting the language so it can serve multiple functions in different areas of society, such as scientific writing, legal documents, and formal communication. In summary, elaboration of function ensures that the standardized language is suitable for all aspects of public and professional life, not just casual or informal contexts.
All right, the next is, a term used to refer to a situation where two different varieties of a language co-occur throughout a speech community. each with a distinct range of social functions. Two varieties that co-occur throughout the speech community. That's the diglossia. Diglossia. Now, the next is a language variety that is formed by. So, also about diglossia, there's a thing that they serve different functions. So, for example, there would be a different language used in the market versus there would be a different language for official purposes. Now, moving on to the next one, a language variety that is formed by two mutually unintelligible speech communities. Unintelligible speech communities meaning they don't have a language in common and attempting to communicate, resulting in reduced grammatical structures, lexicon, and syntactic range is, of course, it's the pigeon. Moving on to the next one, to convey the emotional content and identity in terms of personality or individual creativity. That's the expressive function, certainly. Now, a function of higher language to describe ordinary language. Higher language for ordinary language, that's the metalingual function. The next, relationship between the entity in the external world and the linguistic expression which relates to it. So the relationship between the entity in the external world and the linguistic expression which relates to it. So there's an entity in the external world and there's an expression which relates to it. That's most probably that's the referential function of language. Now, the next, learning strategies. So, learning strategies. Who proposed learning strategies? Krashen, McLaughlin, O'Malley, and Shamet, and Selinker. Now, it's O'Malley and Shamet. So, what I want you to do is that I want you to elaborate on what learning strategies are, what context was it proposed in, like what purpose does proposing the language strategy serve, when was it proposed, in which work was it proposed, which year was this proposed in, and other relevant works done by O'Malley and Shamet. Go ahead and speak on that.
Learning strategies refer to the techniques and methods that learners use to enhance their ability to acquire and use a new language. These strategies help learners manage and control their learning process effectively, making it easier to understand, remember, and use the language. O'Malley and Chamote's contribution. Who proposed it? O'Malley and Chamote were key figures in the study of learning strategies. They proposed their work on learning strategies in the context of second language acquisition. When and where? Their significant contributions were outlined in their work, Learning Strategies in Second Language Acquisition, published in 1990. Purpose. The purpose of studying learning strategies is to understand how learners approach the process of acquiring a new language. It helps educators identify effective techniques that can be taught to learners to improve their language learning efficiency. What are learning strategies? Cognitive strategies, techniques like using mnemonics, organizing information, or practicing with language exercises. Metacognitive strategies, methods for planning, monitoring, and evaluating one's own learning, such as setting goals or self-assessing progress. Social strategies, engaging with native speakers, participating in language exchange, or seeking feedback. Applications, education. Teachers can use insights from learning strategies research to design more effective instructional methods and materials. Self-learning. Learners can adopt various strategies to improve their language skills based on their individual needs and preferences. Other relevant works by O'Malley and Chamote. Learning Strategies in Second Language Acquisition, 1990. This book provides a comprehensive overview of learning strategies and their application in language learning. The Learning Strategies Handbook. This work further explores practical applications of learning strategies in the classroom. In summary, O'Malley and Chamote's work on learning strategies emphasizes the importance of understanding and employing effective techniques to enhance language acquisition and usage.